All right, so you're diving into some heavy questions about AI and ethics. Can machines actually make ethical decisions? You sent us this article, AI and Morality. Can machines make ethical decisions?
Mm.
And I have to say, I'm really curious to unpack this one.
Yeah, it's a big one. And, it's interesting because even before we talk about machines, we really need to be clear on what we even mean by ethical decisions in the first place.
That's a good point. We throw around words like ethics and morality, but what do those even mean in a practical sense?
Exactly. When we talk about making ethical choices, we're talking about a lot of complex things. It's about understanding fairness, navigating those gray areas where there's no easy answer considering the consequences of our actions. And maybe even more importantly, it often involves empathy, that ability to step into someone else's shoes and understand their feelings. And as it stands, these are all things that machines just don't have.
So if machines lack these really fundamental human qualities, how can they even begin to approach ethical decision making? I mean, the article dives into a few ways AI tries to do this, but are any of them truly successful?
Well, one approach is to use rule-based systems. It's essentially about programming AI with a set of ethical guidelines. A good example is self-driving cars. They're programmed to follow traffic laws, avoid collisions, and generally minimize harm.
Ah, so like that classic trolley problem, where
Yeah.
the car has to decide whether to swerve and potentially harm the passenger or stay on course and potentially hit a group of pedestrians.
Precisely. But the problem is, the real world is rarely so black and white, and that's one of the big challenges with rule-based AI. What happens when there is no good choice? Take car manufacturers, for instance. Mercedes prioritizes passenger safety while Tesla focuses on protecting pedestrians. So you see, there are very different approaches, even within what we might consider a rule-based system.
So it seems like even when you try to set clear rules, there's no guarantee of a universally right answer, and that's just one ethical dilemma. What about when things get even more complex?
It definitely gets more complicated when you factor in machine learning. This is where AI learns from the data it's fed. The problem is that data can be flawed and often reflects existing societal biases.
You know, I was reading about that. There was that case with the Compass system. It was used in the U.S. justice system, and it seemed to unfairly label black defendants as higher risk. And then there were issues with healthcare algorithms too, right?
Exactly. There have been cases where algorithms used in healthcare ended up prioritizing certain patients for treatment based on data that wasn't truly representative, and that can actually worsen existing inequalities.
So even if our intentions are good and we're trying to teach machines to be ethical, they can end up perpetuating our own biases. It's a bit unsettling, to be honest. The article did mention value-aligned AI as a potential solution, though. Is that a viable path forward?
It's an idea with a lot of potential. The idea behind value-aligned AI is to very intentionally program human values into the AI. A good example is OpenAI's work on constitutional AI, where they are using a set of principles to guide the AI's behavior. But this raises some tricky questions. For instance, whose values are we talking about? And what happens when different sets of values clash?
Those are some pretty big questions. It seems like there are some real obstacles to overcome when it comes to machine morality. The article outlined a few key challenges, and I have to say, they really got me thinking.
One of the biggest challenges is something called the framing problem. It's essentially AI's difficulty in understanding the nuances of context.
I'm a little fuzzy on that. Can you give me an example?
Let's take the example of a medical triage AI. Statistically, it might make sense to prioritize younger patients who have a higher chance of survival. But is that truly ethical? What about the value of a longer life lived, even if it's statistically less likely?
So the AI might get stuck on the numbers without really understanding the bigger picture or the human values involved.
Yeah.
I can see how that would be a major problem.
Precisely. AI can struggle to grasp that full picture, especially when dealing with something as complex as human ethics.
Then there's the whole issue of moral pluralism, right? The fact that what's considered ethical can vary drastically between cultures and even individuals.
This is a critical point, especially when you think about where AI is primarily being developed. If the values embedded in AI systems are largely coming from Western nations, we run the risk of imposing those values globally. And that could overlook or even conflict with other ethical frameworks.
So it's not just about teaching AI what's right and wrong. It's about acknowledging that the very definitions of right and wrong can be subjective and depend heavily on cultural context. And then there's the question of consciousness, or rather the lack of it in machines.
Exactly. It's crucial to remember that machines don't experience the world like humans do. They don't care about outcomes in the same way we do. If a robot saves you from a burning building, It's not acting out of compassion or heroism, it's simply executing a program.
That's a fascinating and somewhat unsettling thought, and it leads to a really big question, the question of accountability. If an AI makes a decision that has negative consequences, who's responsible? The programmer,
Hmm.
the user. Could the AI itself ever be held accountable?
That's where things get really complex. Our legal and ethical frameworks aren't really equipped to handle the intricacies of AI decision making. And this isn't some far off futuristic scenario, it's something we need to be addressing right now.
The article highlighted some real-world case studies to illustrate these points. Let's start with self-driving cars. They're already on the roads, which means they're already facing ethical dilemmas.
It's a great example because it highlights the immediate nature of these issues. Do you remember that MIT moral machine study? It showed that even humans across the globe can't agree on who to save in a crash scenario. So how can we possibly program an AI to make those sorts of choices ethically when we can't even agree on what that means?
That's a really good point. And then there's the rise of generative AI tools like ChatGPT. They're incredibly powerful and have a lot of potential, but they also have limitations and can be misused.
Absolutely. Even with all the safeguards that are put in place, generative AI can be manipulated to create harmful content. This is something that you, as a user of these tools, need to be acutely aware of. Understanding the limitations and potential for misuse is crucial.
And speaking of misuse, we can't forget about the use of AI in the military. Those are some of the highest stakes imaginable. The article brought up the difficulty in programming proportionality in warfare. How can an AI possibly know what constitutes a fair response in the middle of a conflict?
That question has huge implications. It ties directly into international law and the very definition of a just war. The potential consequences of getting this wrong are enormous.
This is clearly a deeply complex and nuanced topic,
Yeah.
but thankfully, the article also brings in some philosophical frameworks to help us think through all of this.
It touches on deontology, consequentialism, and virtue ethics, each of which offers a different lens through which to view AI morality. Deontology is all about rules and duties, which, as we discussed, AI can handle quite well in straightforward scenarios. But where it struggles is in those gray areas, those situations where rules might conflict or where there is no easy answer.
Okay, I'm starting to see the distinctions here. So what about consequentialism?
Consequentialism judges actions based on their outcomes. And while AI can be very effective at optimizing for specific outcomes, it often struggles to predict all the potential consequences, especially the unintended ones.
So while AI might be able to make decisions that lead to the desired outcome in a narrow sense, it could miss the bigger picture and cause unintended harm.
Precisely. And finally, we have virtue ethics, which is focused on character and moral development. This is where AI really falls short. Machines simply don't possess character in the human sense. They can't learn and grow morally the way we can.
This is all incredibly insightful, and I have to admit, a bit overwhelming. Where does all this leave us? What does the future of AI ethics look like?
That's the question, isn't it? Thankfully, the article points to some potential directions for development. One promising avenue is the idea of hybrid systems, which combine the strengths of both rule-based approaches and the adaptability of machine learning.
So finding that sweet spot between structure and flexibility, that sounds promising.
It does. But the challenge, of course, lies in defining those fundamental ethical rules and making sure that the machine learning component doesn't deviate too far from them.
Another idea that stood out to me was participatory design, which involves bringing in diverse voices and perspectives to shape the ethical framework of AI. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. Participatory design shifts the focus away from purely technical solutions and emphasizes the importance of societal values. It begs the questions. Who gets a seat at the table? Whose voices are being heard and considered when developing these systems? These are difficult questions, but they are critical ones to ask. And it can't be a one-time conversation. This needs to be an ongoing process as AI continues to evolve.
I think you've hit on something really important there. We need to move beyond technical fixes and really engage with the human side of this equation. And speaking of understanding the human side, what about explainable AI? That idea of making AI's decision-making processes transparent so we can understand why it's doing what it's doing? I feel like that could be a big piece of the puzzle.
It absolutely is. Explainable AI, or XAI, is all about transparency. If we want to build trust in AI systems and hold those systems accountable, we need to be able to understand the reasoning behind their decisions. If an AI makes a decision that seems unfair or even harmful, we need to be able to trace back its logic and identify potential biases or errors.
It's like having a clear audit trail for AI's thought process. But even with all these safeguards in place, It feels like there's still a fundamental gap.
Mm.
AI might be able to follow rules and optimize for outcomes, but can it ever truly grasp the ethical weight of its decisions? I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea of machines making moral judgments.
That's a fundamental question, and one that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. As we discussed earlier, AI lacks consciousness, empathy, and that intuitive sense of right and wrong that we humans often take for granted. It's what makes this whole conversation so challenging. We're trying to teach machines to do something that we as humans still struggle with.
That's a sobering thought. But it's also a call to action. We can't just sit back and hope that technology will magically solve these ethical dilemmas for us.
I completely agree. We need to be proactive, engaged, and willing to have these tough conversations about what kind of future we want to build with AI. It's about much more than just writing code. It's about carefully considering the values we embed in the technologies we create.
It's about recognizing that this isn't a destination, it's a journey. And the ethical landscape of AI will keep changing. So we need to be prepared to adapt and adjust our course as we go.
That's a great way to put it. It's about accepting the complexity and acknowledging that there may not be simple answers. But the stakes are far too high to just ignore these questions altogether.
So where does all this leave us, the everyday users of AI? What can we do to navigate this ethically complex landscape? What advice would you give to our listener?
First and foremost, be informed. Take the time to understand the capabilities and limitations of AI, and be aware of the potential biases it might carry. Don't just blindly trust the technology. Ask questions, challenge assumptions, and demand transparency.
There's such an important point. We can't just passively consume AI. We need to be active participants in shaping its development and use.
Exactly, and it starts with awareness. The more you understand about AI, the better equipped you'll be to make informed choices about the tools you use and the data you share.
And don't be afraid to speak up. If you see something that seems ethically questionable, call it out. We all have a responsibility to ensure that AI is used responsibly and ethically. This is a team effort.
And remember, this is a field that's constantly evolving. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. There's so much more to explore and discuss.
This deep dive has been incredible. It's given me a whole new perspective on the power and responsibility that come with AI. And I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. It's a conversation that I think we'll be having for years to come.
But before we go any further, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about AI lacking that inherent sense of right and wrong. Does that mean there's no hope for AI ever becoming truly ethical? Is that even a possibility?
That's a question that continues to spark a lot of debate among philosophers and AI experts. Some believe that as AI becomes more sophisticated, it might actually develop a form of artificial consciousness. That allows for a deeper understanding of ethics.
So sort of moral awakening for machines. That's both fascinating and, if I'm being honest, a little bit terrifying.
Indeed. But even if such a scenario were to unfold, it would bring with it a whole new set of ethical challenges. Would we treat these conscious AI entities as equals? What rights would they have? How could we ensure their ethical behavior? And how would they view us? It's mind-boggling to think about.
It feels like we're entering uncharted territory, a
Yeah.
space where the map is still being drawn as we go. It's both exciting and daunting, but it's a journey we need to embark on together thoughtfully and carefully.
Well said. The future of AI ethics isn't preordained. It's something we're shaping right now. It's up to us to make sure that it benefits humanity and upholds our values.
That's a lot to ponder, but it's also a powerful reminder that we have a voice and a role to play in shaping this future.
Absolutely. This deep dive has given us all a lot to think about, and I'm sure it's sparked some questions in your mind as well.
So let's keep the conversation going. What aspects of AI ethics resonated most with you? What are your hopes and concerns about the future of AI? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Because ultimately, the future of AI is a shared responsibility. We all have a stake in it, and we all have a voice.
Let's use it wisely. And with that, we'll wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into AI and morality. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll continue to explore these complex and fascinating questions.
Welcome back. Let's continue our exploration of this complex and fascinating topic.
You know, it's fascinating to think that we started this deep dive asking if machines can be ethical, but we've kind of uncovered something even bigger. It's almost like AI is forcing us to examine what it means to be human in an age of increasingly intelligent machines.
It really is. It really is a profound observation.
Yeah.
AI is pushing us to confront some really fundamental questions about our own values, our place in the world, and what it means to live a good life. I think that's at the heart of why this topic is so compelling.
It's like AI is holding up a mirror to humanity. showing us both our strengths and our weaknesses, which is a bit unsettling, to be honest.
It can be. The article doesn't shy away from the potential downsides of AI. We've talked about bias accountability and the risk of imposing Western values on a global scale. These are all issues that need our attention and careful consideration.
And it's not just theoretical. These ethical dilemmas are already playing out in the real world. Think about those healthcare algorithms we mentioned. If an algorithm denies someone access to vital treatment because of biased data, that's not a technical glitch. It's a matter of life and death.
You're absolutely right. And it's not always about malicious intent. Sometimes it's unconscious bias embedded in the data that the AI learns from.
Which brings us back to the importance of diversity in AI development. We need people from all walks of life, with different perspectives and experiences, involved in creating these systems. It's the only way to identify and mitigate these biases.
Couldn't agree more. So, we've established that AI isn't inherently ethical, but that we have a responsibility to guide its development in a way that aligns with our values. But how do we actually do that? That's the million-dollar question, isn't
Well,
it?
certainly not easy, but the article did offer some potential paths forward. Remember those hybrid systems we were talking about, combining rule-based frameworks with the flexibility of machine learning.
Right. Finding that balance between structure and adaptability, it seems like it could be a promising approach, at least for some applications.
But couldn't we theoretically program AI with a huge set of rules to handle a wider range of situations? Wouldn't that solve the problem?
It's a good thought, but the challenge is that the real world is messy and unpredictable. It's impossible to anticipate every scenario and create a rule for it. Plus, as AI systems become more complex, managing a massive rule set becomes incredibly difficult. Hybrid systems aim to address that by allowing AI to learn and adapt within certain ethical boundaries.
Okay, I see the limitations there. So what about participatory design? That idea of involving a diverse group of stakeholders in shaping the ethical framework of AI. Could that be a more effective solution?
It could be a crucial part of the solution. Participatory design is about more than just technical expertise. It's about bringing in diverse perspectives, values, and lived experiences to the table. It asks, whose voices are being heard? Who is shaping these systems, and whose interests are they serving?
Those are crucial questions. And this can't be a one-time conversation, right? It needs to be an ongoing process as AI continues to evolve.
Absolutely. We need a dynamic approach to AI ethics, one that adapts to new challenges and technologies as they emerge. It's about staying engaged, asking questions, and making sure the conversation continues.
Speaking of staying engaged, let's talk more about explainable AI. That idea of making the decision-making processes of AI transparent so we can understand how it's arriving at its conclusions. It seems like that could be a critical part of building trust and accountability.
It's absolutely key. Explainable AI is about lifting the veil, so to speak. If an AI makes a decision that seems unfair or harmful, we need to be able to trace back its reasoning and understand why.
So it's like having an audit trail for an AI's thought process. But even with all these safeguards, I still feel a bit uneasy about the idea of machines making moral judgments. Can we ever really bridge that fundamental gap between human ethics and artificial intelligence?
That's a profound question, and it's at the core of this entire discussion. As we talked about earlier, AI lacks consciousness, empathy, and that intuitive sense of right and wrong that we as humans often take for granted. We're essentially trying to teach machines to do something that we ourselves still grapple with.
It feels like we're venturing into uncharted territory. But we can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend these issues don't exist.
You're absolutely right. We need to be proactive to engage with these questions head on and to have honest conversations about the future we're creating with AI. It's about more than just the technology itself. It's about the values we embed in it.
And about recognizing that there will be bumps along the way. This isn't a straightforward path. It's a journey, and the ethical landscape of AI will continue to evolve. We need to be flexible and adapt as we go.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about acknowledging the complexity and understanding that there may not be easy answers. But the stakes are simply too high to shy away from these conversations.
So where does this leave our listener, the everyday user of AI? What practical advice can we offer for navigating this ethically complex landscape?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say stay informed. Learn about AI, its capabilities, its limitations, and the potential biases it can carry. Don't just blindly accept what technology offers. Ask questions, think critically, and demand transparency.
You know, one thing that struck me during our conversation is that we can't just be passive consumers of AI. We need to be active participants in shaping how it's developed and used. Our voices and choices matter.
Absolutely. And that starts with awareness and education. The more you understand about AI, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions about the tools you use and the data you share. It's about taking ownership.
And don't be afraid to speak up. If you see something that seems ethically questionable, say something. We all have a responsibility to ensure that AI is developed and used responsibly. We're all in this together.
That's the spirit. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those questions coming. There's so much more to explore, and we all have a role to play in shaping the future of AI.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. It's given me a whole new understanding of the immense power and responsibility that come with AI.
It's been a pleasure discussing these ideas with you. I think this conversation is just beginning, and I have a feeling we'll be revisiting these topics for years to come.
Before we wrap up part 2, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the possibility of AI developing a form of consciousness. What would that even look like? And what would it mean for our understanding of AI ethics?
That's where things get really interesting and potentially a bit scary. Imagine AI that not only processes information, but also has subjective experiences, feelings, and self-awareness. It's a concept that's captivated philosophers and science fiction writers for decades.
So a sort of moral awakening for machines. What would be the implications? Would we have to rethink our entire approach to AI ethics?
Absolutely. If AI were to become conscious, it would raise a whole host of new ethical questions. Would these conscious AI entities have rights? Would they be considered moral agents? How would we ensure their well-being and prevent harm? And how would they view us? It's mind-boggling to think about.
It's almost like stepping into a whole new dimension of ethics.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about programming machines. We're potentially talking about interacting with a new form of intelligent life. It's both exhilarating and terrifying.
It really is uncharted territory. But it's a conversation we need to be having now. The future of AI is being shaped as we speak, and it's crucial that we engage with these questions thoughtfully and proactively.
And as always, listener, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this idea of conscious AI? Does it excite you, scare you? Let us know.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of ideas and questions, and it's clear that we've only just begun to explore the ethical implications of AI.
So stay with us as we continue to unpack this complex and fascinating topic. We'll be back shortly with the Bellany, part 3 of our deep dive into AI and morality. Welcome back to our deep dive into AI and morality. We've covered a lot of ground, from the challenges of programming ethics into machines to the potential for AI to develop consciousness. It's been a fascinating and at times mind-boggling journey.
It really has. We've explored some complex questions about the nature of ethics, the role of technology in our lives, and even what it means to be human in an age of intelligent machines.
You know, as I was reflecting on everything we've discussed, it struck me that this entire conversation about AI ethics is ultimately a reflection of our own values and aspirations as human beings.
That's a great insight. AI is in many ways a mirror, reflecting our own hopes and fears about the future. It forces us to confront our own ethical dilemmas and to think critically about the kind of world we want to create.
It's like AI is challenging us to become more ethically aware, not just as individuals,
Yeah.
but as a society. It's pushing us to have those difficult conversations about what truly matters and how we want to shape the future.
And in grappling with the ethical implications of AI, we might just gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and our own values. It's an opportunity for growth, both individually and collectively.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about, and I hope it's done the same for you, listener. Remember, the future of AI is not set in stone. It's a story that's still being written. We all have a role to play in shaping the narrative.
We've talked about the importance of staying informed, asking questions, and demanding transparency. But it goes beyond that. It's about being active participants in the conversation, about using our voices and our choices to guide the development and use of AI in a way that benefits humanity.
We can't just leave it to the experts or assume that technology will magically solve these ethical dilemmas for us. It's a collective responsibility. That requires all of us to engage, to learn, and to advocate for a future where AI is aligned with our values.
Well said. The future of AI is not predetermined. It's a story we're writing together. Line by line, decision by decision. Let's make it a story worth telling.
And on that note, we come to the end of our deep dive into AI and morality. We hope you found this exploration insightful and thought-provoking.
Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Continue to explore these ideas, challenge assumptions, and engage in the ongoing dialogue about the ethical implications of AI.
Thanks for joining us in this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a future where technology serves humanity.